But first on BBC One, it's David Nimbleby.
Welcome to Question Time, and tonight we're in Bognor Regis. And what is more, we're in the Skyline Pavilion, Butlins, in Bognor, and our entertainers on the panel tonight are the Conservative MP, Jacob Rees-Mogg, the Labour MP, who last year resigned from the Shadow Cabinet, briefly to challenge Jeremy Corbyn for the leadership of the party, Angela Eagle, Joanna Cherry, who speaks for the SNP on justice and home affairs, the Times and Spectator columnist Matthew Parris, and the chairman of Wetherspoon, the pub chain, Tim Martin. Thank you very much. And remember, at home, if you're watching the programme, you can join the debate either on Facebook or Twitter or by texting us on 83981. And if you push that little red button or flick on it at the top, you can see the text going across the bottom of the screen. So, our first question tonight from Florence Holland Norris, please. Florence Holland Norris.
Theresa May said that now is not the time for Scottish independence referendum. When is the time?
Theresa May said now is not the time for an independence referendum. When is the time? Jacob Rees-Mogg.
I strongly believe that the people of Scotland have the right, as all nations do, to self-determination. That they, if they want to be a separate country, have a right to do that. And I'm sure that the people of Scotland could be a successful nation, as they were before 1707. However, now is not the time, because we are in the midst of the Brexit negotiations, or they're about to begin, and there is a 2-year period those will go on for, and Scotland wouldn't know what it was leaving to until those are completed. But secondly, there was a referendum in 2014, which the Scottish National Party said would be for a generation. And I assume that generations in Scotland are much the same as they are in England, and 3 years is a pretty short generation.
Florence's question was, when is the time?
Well, I'm happy to accept the generational aspect of the call by the Scottish National Party. I think that's perfectly reasonable. I don't think you can bind future generations.
So 20 years or so you think there should be one, well, not until then?
But this is a political discussion. I think...
Well, of course it's a political discussion.
Yes, we're having. That's what we're having. But it's that rather than being dressed up as some matter of great principle. It's a political discussion between Mrs. Sturgeon, who is a very highly capable politician, is trying to pick her moment when she thinks she will have the greatest chance of winning. That's completely understandable. And she thinks that with the uncertainty that there may be in the midst of the Brexit negotiations, that will be the opportunity. From the point of view of Mrs. May, it's the counter to that. It is that this is an unfair choice to offer to the people of Scotland at a point when they don't know whether they might get a very good deal within a Brexit situation, that what is going to happen to fishing and farming rights that may well, if the current devolution system remains, go to Scotland, because under the current Acts of Parliament, anything that is not reserved to Westminster goes to Edinburgh. Now, that hasn't been settled, whether the things that are at Brussels come back. And I would add one final thing, if I may. It's always struck me as very odd that people who want independence from Westminster want immediately to come under the yoke of Brussels, and that they've become the Brussels National Party rather than the Scottish National Party.
So, Joanna Cherry, Theresa May said now is not the time. We heard her all over radio and television today saying that. When is the time?
Well, I'm going to agree with Theresa May. Now is not the time. And if she'd been listening properly to what the First Minister said on Monday, the First Minister announced that she intends to hold a referendum in 18 months' time, or approximately at that time, because we know, of course, because Michelle Barnier has told us, and also David Davies, that within 18 months of triggering Article 50, an agreement will have to be reached, so that there will be a 6-month window of opportunity for the European Parliament and other parliaments to vote on whatever deal is reached. And it's very true we had an independence referendum back in September 2014, But the point is that circumstances have changed completely since then. During that independence referendum, we were told that the way to guarantee our citizenship in the EU was to vote to remain part of the UK. Now, I realise that this part of England, and indeed England and Wales as a whole, voted to leave the European Union, and I respect that. But Scotland voted to remain part of the European Union, and we currently face being taken out of the EU against our will. Now, if there's one thing we've learnt this week, it's that it's generally a good idea to keep your manifesto promises. And Nicola Sturgeon made a manifesto promise to the Scottish people in the Scottish general election last year that the Scottish Parliament would hold another referendum if there was a material change in circumstances, such as Scotland being taken out of the European Union against its will. And that material change of circumstances has occurred. And on the back of that manifesto, Nicola Sturgeon won 46.5% of the vote in Scotland. Now, that's the highest share of vote for a government across the UK since 1966.
Would you agree?
Even Labour in 97, with their tremendous landslide, didn't get that much. So Nicola Sturgeon has a mandate on the back of a manifesto commitment to hold this referendum.
So when is the time? Would you agree that it's sensible to wait until the Brexit negotiations, whatever form they take, are finished, so the people of Scotland see what's on offer before they have a second referendum on whether to remain in the UK or not?
As I've said, David, you'll not be surprised to hear that I agree with what the First Minister Nicola Sturgeon said on Monday.
Do you think Brexit should be finished?
The Scottish people need to make an informed choice.
In other words, wait until after the negotiations.
After 18 months after Article 50 has been triggered, we've been told by Michel Barnier for the European Union, he's their chief negotiator, and importantly by David Davies, and he told us this yesterday at the Brexit Select Committee on which I sit, that he agrees with Michel Barnier that an agreement will have to be reached within 18 months of Article 50 being triggered. And the reason for that is there's a 2-year period and you need a 6-month window for the European Union Parliament and other European Union member states to ratify the agreement.
Okay, I think we get the point.
When I think it should be, is I think it should be after that degree of certainty has been reached, when we see the deal that has been negotiated, and when other European Union countries are getting a chance to say whether they like the deal or not, Scotland should have a chance to say whether Scotland wants to take that deal or whether Scotland wants to be an independent country.
Thank you very much, Joanna. The man there. Yes, you.
So, you said that Nicola Sturgeon said that if there'd been a material change in the circumstances, they'd hold a second referendum, that being dragged out of the EU. But if I'm not mistaken, if you leave the UK, Scotland aren't automatically in the EU, so you'll be coming out of the EU anyway if you leave the UK. So that's kind of contradictory to what she's saying is the justification for having a new referendum.
Well, OK, don't answer that for the moment. Let's just leave it. We'll come back to it. And the woman over there in the third row, let's just hear from one or two members of our audience. Yes, we had a lot of questions.
When you say that the Scottish people voted on the independence referendum in 2014, that they thought they were voting to stay in the EU. No, they already knew that we were going to have a referendum on the UK's membership of the EU, and they voted to remain as part of the UK.
I will... Forgive me, Joanna, I will come to you, but I don't want the whole debate to be dominated by your position.
But I would like a chance to answer these questions.
Of course, if you just remember them and you can come back to them. Angela Eagle.
Well, I think that we're divided enough at the moment, and actually I think this is an opportunistic thing that Nicola Sturgeon has done. I think the politics of grievance aren't going to help us come together and try to make the best deal in the Brexit negotiations for all of the countries of the United Kingdom and all of the regions of the United Kingdom too. I think it's important as well to recognise that we need to work together in these crucial next 2 years, and to launch this second bid after only 3 years to have an independence referendum, I think is mischievous, to say the least.
What do you expect?
I mean,
what do you expect Nicola Sturgeon to do during the Brexit? She says there's no contact between her and Theresa May. She's not been included in these things. What do you expect her to do?
Well,
just sit it out and wait while the negotiations go on?
I have to say that I think that Theresa May needs to be much more inclusive in the way in which she is conducting the Brexit negotiations, both with Parliament, which she initially tried to exclude, and also with the with Wales and Scotland. And I'd like to see a special committee of the regions set up so that she could involve them too. I think she'd have a much more powerful and stronger argument to do a better deal if she was much more inclusive. I think when you think about it as a social democrat, we want solidarity and working together. We don't want and don't think that our country's future is best made by dividing us up and separating off one piece from another.
Are you briefly in favour of what Jeremy Corbyn said he was in favour of, which he was fine with a second referendum? Are you fine with a second referendum?
Well, the Labour Party's position, and Jeremy has clarified this, is that we are against a second referendum. The MSPs in Scotland, Labour's MSPs, will be voting against during the debate which will happen at Holyrood next week. We think that the SNP should get on with doing the day job and actually govern Scotland in the interests of everybody.
We're doing that, Angela, we're doing that.
OK.
I have to say as well, I don't understand why the SNP want to stay in the single market in Europe, which many of us wanted to stay in, but think that it's OK to, in order to achieve that, to leave the even bigger single market, which is
want to stay
the
in
UK.
Both. We want to stay in both.
The woman up there yes, you.
But do we know if the Scottish people have the appetite for a second referendum so soon?
What's your view?
I don't think they should, no.
Matthew Parris.
I don't think Mrs Sturgeon actually wants a second referendum before Brexit. I think she wants to call for a second referendum before Brexit, and she knows she can rely on Mrs May to refuse to have one. So it suits both of them in lots of ways. But I do think that if in a sustained way the Scottish people want a second bite at this cherry, I think they should be allowed to have it. Circumstances have changed. And here I agree with Joanna Cherry. Circumstances have changed since the last referendum in Scotland. It's a completely different United Kingdom that Scotland is in now. And if the Scottish people want to take another look at that after we've left, then I don't think any government should deny that to them for very long. And I must say to Jacob that for those who wanted to insist that the will of the people as to whether we should stay in the European Union or not should be consulted and should prevail, then to deny that same privilege to the people of Scotland seems to me perverse.
This is a question of timing. Not.
Well, yes,
I wouldn't begin to
years.
deny the right of the Scottish people to have another referendum
Jacob,
at some
when
point.
you and people in the audience were having their referendum on whether or not to stay part of the European Union, how would you have felt if Brussels said it's up to Brussels whether you have it or not, and it's up to Brussels when you have it?
Well,
How would you have felt about that? That's what we're being told. It's up to Westminster whether or not you can have it and when you have it. Now, if anything is going to destroy the union between Scotland and England, then that sort of attitude is going to do it. And
Well, you want the union. You want the union destroyed, don't you?
Well, indeed, but Theresa May.
You wanted it destroyed, didn't
Theresa
you?
May
Now, hang on.
Theresa May
Are you in
says that she
favour of the-
doesn't, David.
No,
My
but
point,
you do.
Yes.
Well, therefore, these
I don't want
arguments
to
fall.
destroy it. I want to create a new partnership
All right.
of
You
equals.
want to break it.
Now, I'd like to answer the points in the audience very quickly. Coming out of the EU, sir, and would Scotland still be in the European Union? We are in completely uncharted territory. But at the moment, Scotland is part of a member state. No other EU member state has said that it would veto an independent Scotland's membership. And the current president...
The Spanish
have not said that. You may check, go home and Google this evening. The Spanish government have not said that they would veto. Some voices in Spain are concerned about Scottish independence because they think it might set a precedent for Catalonia. But Esteban Pons, a member of the governing party in Spain and a leading MEP, pointed out last week that the situation of Scotland as an ancient independent nation which voluntarily entered into a union with another nation, England, is completely different from breaking Catalonia away from the rest of Spain.
Okay, well, now leave that for a moment, because I want to bring in Tim.
I'd like to answer the lady
no,
who
you
said...
can. I'll give you plenty of time. Tim
Excellent,
Martin hasn't yet spoken, and we've had quarter of an hour of the programme. Tim.
I would say that on a practical level, it's definitely right, as everyone seems to be agreed, that there should be another referendum in the future in these particular circumstances. I think on a practical level also, it's very unreasonable to think while we're organising the business of getting out of the EU, organising trade deals and so on, that at the same time, but before you actually leave, there's a massive other political issue, which is a referendum. So if there is going to be one, it should be after Brexit has occurred, and you've also got enough time to see what it's like.
All right, you said the second row from the back.
If in the next referendum that Scotland have, they vote to leave, I think that's great, because that's democracy in action. But what I don't understand is why Nicola Sturgeon and the SNP are so pro being part of the European Union, because you can't be part of the European Union and be independent.
OK, and the woman there, you?
What I seem to hear from the SNP is about the English government and the Scottish Parliament. Why then have they got 50-something MPs in the United Kingdom Parliament?
All right, well...
Because that's what it is.
OK. I just want to stick on this subject. I want Shirley Scott, can we just have your question?
Unbelievable.
Is the will of the 52% worth more than keeping a united kingdom?
In other words, is Brexit a price worth paying if it breaks up the United Kingdom? Jacob.
I very much want to keep the United Kingdom. I think that we are a bigger country together. I think that for family ties, for historic ties, it's in England's interest that the Union remains, and that it's also in Scotland's interest. I think it is important to us, and when you think of what your country is, I think my country is the United Kingdom, not narrowly England. I would be very sad to see that destroyed. And it's worth bearing in mind that not far off 40% of people in Scotland voted to leave, and that you see in opinion polls that quite a lot of people who voted to leave do not want, even if they supported independence in 2014, to end up in a Scotland that is in the European Union. And so things have changed a great deal because of both referendums. Is it a price worth paying? I'm afraid it's a price I don't want to pay, and I don't think we will have to pay. I think we can both have a United Kingdom and leave the European Union, and that is the best answer for all of us.
And Joanna Cherry, do you think that's possible? Is that possible?
Do I think what's possible?
What Jacob just said, we can have a United Kingdom and leave the EU?
Well, the difficulty is that Theresa May has been completely intransigent in looking at any of the compromise proposals the Scottish Government have put forward in the light of the Brexit vote. To answer the lady in the audience's question a moment ago, the reason why we have 59 Scottish MPs, 56 of whom are SNP, at Westminster is because Scotland's Parliament is devolved and only has powers over certain things. Defence, foreign affairs, macroeconomic policy, immigration are all at Westminster. So that's why we presently have Scottish MPs at Westminster. And indeed, I'm very proud to represent the people of Edinburgh South West at Westminster. But I don't think it will be possible to preserve the UK because of Theresa May's intransigence. Now, 3 months ago, the Scottish Government put forward a set of compromise proposals whereby Scotland would remain part of the United Kingdom, but also part of the single market. And Theresa May has refused to discuss those proposals. And yesterday, when I was questioning David Davies, he ridiculed me when I suggested that it would be at least courtesy for the government in London to respond to the government in Edinburgh's proposal. So that's what we're up against. And in the last independence referendum, we were told in Scotland that we are an equal partner in this union. It doesn't feel like equality when your views are completely overlooked. We were asked not to leave the UK, but to stay and lead the United Kingdom. It doesn't look like we're leading the United Kingdom when we're being completely overlooked. And it's not the politics of grievance, Angela. It's the politics of democracy and respect. We are simply asking for our voice to be heard.
All right, thank you.
It is not the politics division. I just want to make one further point, David, because the people in the audience are raising points.
Only because there are 4 other people on the panel and a number of people in the audience. I know you have a lot you'd like to say, and I can't just allow you to take the programme over with what you're saying, with great respect.
Very happy not to take the programme over, but I would like the opportunity to answer specific points.
All right, well, I'll bring you back in a moment.
Sure, the audience would like their points to be answered.
The woman there on the gangway.
Thank you. It strikes me we're spending an awful lot of time talking about should Scotland have another referendum. I agree. It's the Scottish people's rights to have that. But right now, we are getting ready to leave the EU. And it's far more important, I feel, and surely you must agree, that Scotland and Wales and England all work together so that we get what we want when we leave the EU, and then afterwards devote the time to Scotland. Do you then want to have a referendum?
All right, and you, sir, in the blue.
And what currency are you going to use once you leave the, if you get your referendum and you leave the United Kingdom? What currency have you got? The groat, is it? Or the pound or the euro? Which currency are you going to use?
Can I? Well, I'll have to let you answer that. The euro, are you going for?
Well, it's perhaps worthwhile reminding ourselves that viewers in Scotland are watching this programme tonight, and we perhaps shouldn't ridicule them in the same way that I wouldn't wish to ridicule people in the audience. But to answer your question, sir, unlike the British government, when we hold our next referendum in Scotland, we will have a detailed plan, and we will set out our plan about how we propose to secure Scotland's place in Europe. We will set out our plan on how we propose to secure a rosy economic future for Scotland, and we will set out our plan on the currency then, and we're working on that at the moment. I'm not going to announce it on this programme tonight, but watch this space.
All right. But you did say you wouldn't be tied to the pound, didn't you, yourself?
I didn't say that.
We probably wouldn't want to be tied to the pound.
No, I said the pound might be a little bit less attractive if it was plummeting after Brexit as it is now. We do have one of the worst performing currencies in the world at the moment, but I take no pleasure in that, because the pound is important to the whole of the United Kingdom.
Okay.
So,
Tim Martin.
I think there were 2 things in the Scottish referendum which were unhelpful in the overall debate. One was that Scotland would go to hell in a handcart economically if it did leave. There are countries the size of Scotland, the Republic of Ireland, New Zealand, Singapore, similar economies which have done extremely well. But the other point that no one grasped the nettle in respect of was that if you want your own country and your own government, you have to have your own currency. A currency and a government are both sides of the same coin. And so I think that that's a nettle that wasn't grasped at the time by the SNP. We've all seen the problems in Greece, in Portugal, etc., and in Europe as a result of trying to have a European currency with no government behind it.
Okay, I'll come. We've had a lot of questions about the Scottish referendum, a second referendum. We've also had a lot of questions about Brexit itself, and time is passing. I'd like to take this question from Sue Bringlow, please, which is looking at the Brexit negotiations. Sue.
In light of David Davis's admission that no economic assessment has been carried out on the effects of a hard Brexit, should the triggering of Article 50 be delayed?
This was before the committee, Joanna Cherry, that you heard him on yesterday. So since he doesn't have any idea what might happen if it doesn't work, should he delay until he has worked it out? Andrew Regal.
Well, it was an astonishing admission at the Select Committee this week from the Secretary of State for exiting the European Union that he's done absolutely no analytical work on the costs of the fallback position, which is exiting the European Union without any kind of deal, that they haven't done any work to see what that would actually cost and what the implications of that would be for our economy. And yet we have a Prime Minister who's gone around the country saying no deal is better than a bad deal. But they haven't actually done the basic homework. It seems that David Davis comes from the Boris Johnson school of doing your homework. Don't do any of it. Don't do any of it and hope you can bluff your way through. And then following the budget and the screeching, embarrassing U-turn on national insurance contributions that the Chancellor has put us through this week, are we going to let these people do the Brexit negotiations, which are far, far more difficult than a budget, a simple budget with 28 things in it? And he gets that wrong. So I'm seriously worried now about how this is going, and I actually think...
to stand up and say something then on a Wednesday. He doesn't do anything. He stands there and everyone turns off. You've got mobile phones, you've got everything.
Who are you talking about?
No one takes a notice of him.
Who are you talking about?
About Corbyn. He doesn't stand up and do anything. You're saying there, stand up to Theresa May. You've got your own leader and he doesn't do anything. And I know you don't like him, but you're going to have to do something.
I don't think anyone can accuse me of not having an opinion on that. But the important thing, I think, for our Prime Minister is that she doesn't try to do this in the way she's begun by doing it. She's got to bring the nation together, the 48% as well as the 52%. She's got to take us forward, and she has to do that by actually including everybody, not this high-handed, leave it to us, we don't want to talk to you about it attitude. And I think as a country we will then have a much better chance of doing a better deal. I'm deeply worried about how they've started.
All right, let me just remind you of Sue's question, Jacob. In the light of David Davis' admission no economic assessment has been carried out on the effects of a hard Brexit, should Article 50 be delayed?
No, definitely not, and I'm so pleased that Mr Davis has said this. Think back to the referendum campaign. The Bank of England, the OECD, the IMF all told us we were ruined. It was all a disaster. We were going to have a punishment budget within days of daring to vote to leave the European Union. All these clever economists got the whole thing completely wrong. And what we don't want to do is to think that we can model economically what may happen with any degree of precision in 2 years' time, depending on factors that are uncertain. We can't do that, and it is a false position to put yourself in. It's a false reassurance. What you want to do is to look at the general picture and make a judgment. How do we trade with 60% of the world already? We do so under WTO rules. Would we need to apply tariffs on goods coming into this country if we were out of the customs union? No, we would not. That would be a voluntary choice for us. There is no need for tariffs. So you can make an intelligent judgment without getting in all these people who got it so hopelessly wrong only a year ago. And I think it's worth learning from experience.
Are you talking about accepting 10% tariffs for our car industry, which would put the automotive industry at a huge disadvantage, and between 30 and 40% tariffs, which the WTO has for agricultural products?
On those 2 points, we have already had a bigger depreciation in the pound than the tariff that would apply to cars. And on agriculture, we are only 55% self-sufficient in food. So that if those tariffs were imposed on British beef, for example, and we opposed 70% tariffs because they're 70% on beef, on Irish beef, that would be fantastic for our beef farmers. I'm not saying we should do this, but we would be in a very strong position to retaliate if vicious tariffs were imposed on us. And we have a huge trade deficit with the European Union.
Matthew, I'll come to you. The person in spectacles there in the middle, yes.
Surely the panel would accept, maybe bar the two socialists, that free enterprise and unilateral free trade, as proven throughout the Victorian era and indeed with the great man Robert Peel, is extremely effective, and British business and free enterprise will always overcome trade barriers put up by other countries, and that specialisation is the key to success.
All right. Matthew Parris.
Well, I'm afraid I have to agree with Jacob Rees-Mogg. It is absolutely impossible to do any kind of assessment of what might happen to us if we crash out of the European Union without a reasonable agreement. And it breaks my heart, Jacob, that you and your friends are taking us down this road.
So you think the outcome is going to be falling off the cliff?
Yes. Yeah, well, we may get a very hard Brexit. We may get a crashing out with no agreement at all. It's perfectly clear, I think, to almost everybody who travels on the continent that our European partners are not going to give us a cushy deal. Why should they?
Tim Martin?
I negotiate a lot of trading agreements over the years, and the one thing, as I think some people have said here, Jacob said, is you can't guarantee the outcome in advance, and there are so many variables it may not be worthwhile trying. I think our best approach with the EU is to say we're happy to do a free trade deal with you, or we'll trade under World Trade Organization rules. It's up to you. It's under those circumstances we'll get the best deal. If everyone says we're desperate for a free trade deal, we'll be inclined not to get one. But if we don't impose any tariffs, at the moment the EU is not a free trading organisation. For 7% of the world it's free trade. For the other 93% there are huge tariffs. We can drop the prices people pay in the shops in Bognor Regis by 7 or 8% if from the end of the Brexit negotiations we just don't charge any tariffs to third-party countries. Prices will go down. We'll be better off. The government will get more tax.
All right. Okay. The woman up there, yes.
It might sound a bit simple, and it seems obvious to me that surely a lot of these conversations and decisions should have been spoken about and made before we were given the choice to vote.
Joanna, you agree with that?
I wholeheartedly agree with you, Madam. Yesterday's performance by David Davies before the Exiting the EU Select Committee was quite extraordinary. And I have to say all credit to the chair of the Exiting the EU Select Committee, Hilary Benn, and also Angela's colleague Pat McFadden for really putting David Davies on the spot. Not only did he tell us he'd made no economic assessment of the effect of crashing out of the EU with no deal, he also went on to say that yes, if we fell back and relied on WTO rules, 30 to 40% would be slapped on British agricultural exports, 10% on car exports. He went on to say that, yes, he hadn't really thought about it, but now that it was put to him, yes, we would all lose our EHIC travel, health insurance when we were travelling abroad. He also said, yes, the financial services sector, which is so important to London and Edinburgh, which I represent, will lose its passporting rights. He also agreed with Hilary Benn that we would fall out of the EU-United States Open Skies Agreement, which would make airfares a lot more expensive. Now, I respect the fact that the people of England and Wales voted to leave the European Union. But I'm sure the people of England and Wales didn't vote to make their country poorer and didn't vote to make their country have less free trade. Now, it might surprise you to hear this. As a Scottish nationalist, I'm a great fan of English wine, and I know you have some great Sauvignon Blancs in this area of West Sussex. If you crash out with no deal, 32% will be tariff for exports of that wine will be slapped on. Okay. So these are all the things that David Davies now admits to be the case, but weren't discussed before the referendum.
All right.
So, like the lady who asked the question, Sue, I am worried that we seem to be proceeding with the plan.
Joanna, I have to stop you again. I'm sorry. The man up there, yes. Thank you very much, Joanna. Yes, you, and then I'll come to you here.
Given the incredible uncertainty with regards to leaving the European Union, does it not make sense to have a second referendum when the final deal is known?
Well, referendums, second referendums being all the rage, why not?
I certainly think, and I did vote in the House of Commons, that there should be a meaningful vote, at least in the House of Commons, and proper debate about the kind of deal that the government come back with. I think that's entirely right, and whether that be just a vote in the House of Commons after a debate or a second referendum, you can make an argument for either.
But I mean, do you mean a House of Commons vote of the kind that could remove certain parts of the agreement, or one which just says take it or leave it.
Well, we wanted a meaningful vote, and by definition, that doesn't mean a Hobson's choice. You have the whole agreement or absolutely nothing. We'd want there to be a vote when we could send the government back to the negotiating table.
Matthew.
Do you know, we can argue till the cows come home about whether there should be this vote in Parliament or that vote in Parliament and at what point there should be a vote. It will all depend on how public opinion approaches the emerging terms of the deal that we're going to get. And if the public turn against what looks like the kind of deal that we're going to turn against, believe me, Parliament will get a vote. Parliament will demand a vote. MPs are pretty pusillanimous people. They tend to put their fingers up to the wind and see which way public opinion is blowing.
Isn't that their job?
It is their job. It is indeed their job. And if public opinion is blowing against this deal, then there will be a vote in Parliament and the government will not be able to ignore it. The people have spoken and they have declared that 2 + 2 = 5. And that is their... That is...
All right. Jacob Rees-Mogg. I will come to that. Jacob Rees-Mogg, just on the point. Matthew Parris says if public opinion starts to turn against what's negotiated by Davis and the rest, Parliament will change its mind. Do you agree with that?
I see a completely different role for members of Parliament. I think that we are there to stand up for what we believe in, put it to the electorate, and if the electorate want it, they will vote for us, and if they don't want it, they will vote for somebody else. I don't think it is about being a weather vane and just agreeing with the latest opinion poll, which is probably wrong anyway, because the opinion poll is pretty useless. Parliament will have lots of votes, but the British people in a referendum voted to leave. Now, that decision needs to be implemented. What happens after we leave is going to be open to endless negotiation and endless votes, but the fundamental point is that that referendum was authoritative.
Doesn't this just exactly show us that referendums with a sort of yes-no decision are so difficult to bring to the general public? And I think this is exactly the reason why the Scottish referendum has got to be a further generation, because I don't genuinely believe that we're in a position to know the full facts. There are so many different questions, and we're not being told exactly what those things are.
All right.
Well, we know one thing. We know we're not getting £350 million a week for the NHS.
All right. As Jacob says, he prefers to use the net figure. Look, what I'd like to do, a lot of hands up, and we've got other questions. Instead of asking questions of the panel, if I could just hear your opinions and just have 3 or 4 people on that. The woman up there, over there, you've listened to half an hour of debate. What's your view?
I just wondered...
No, sorry, the woman on the... Yes, you.
I just wondered if the MPs got to debate it, if they would vote with their conscience or if they would vote as they were told.
It was your question, wasn't it?
It was my question earlier.
And what's your view?
I think that we're stronger together. I think that the MPs are not representing us very well. They are doing what they are told by the whips and not doing what they believe in.
OK. And the man in red here on the gangway? Yes.
This could all be a moot point anyway, as Marine Le Pen wins in May. She's already said she's going to come out of the euro, and she says that's the cement of the European Union, and the European Union will come crashing down. All right. So this could be a moot point.
And you, sir, in the front row here.
I think as the Americans are saying that the war is too dangerous to be left to the generals, what we heard today from Jacob is so frightening that perhaps Brexit is too dangerous to be left to the Conservative, because it is the generation of our children, our next children, because it's becoming ideological and not what's going to happen in the negotiation.
Okay. You want to answer that?
I'm sorry to disagree, but I think it is a huge economic opportunity for us that, as Tim pointed out, EU is free trade for 7% of the world. The 93% is kept out by tariff barriers. We want to be trading with the whole of the world, not focusing on the narrow European sphere. And that is a generational choice.
Jacob, we already do half of our trade with our nearest neighbours, who are democracies in the European Union.
That's because of the tariffs.
That's because of the tariffs.
But we can trade with the rest of the world too. These
No,
two things aren't
we have
incompatible.
enormous tariffs on the rest of the world. 32% on the wine that you buy in Tim's pubs, 70% on beef. We keep out the rest of the world and we make goods more expensive for British consumers.
You, sir, in the red shirt there, in the third row from the back.
I've heard a lot from the panel about England and Scotland. The United Kingdom includes 2 other countries.
Yes.
Where's their voice tonight?
Yeah.
And what's your view about that?
I think, as other people say, we're stronger together.
Yep.
And Scotland, I'd like, as an Englishman, to have a vote as to whether or not I want Scotland to be part of the United Kingdom.
All right. And yes, the woman at the very back. The woman at the very back, her hand high in the air, yes.
I think that we have a lesson to learn from intersectionalism, and that is that when we're talking about racism, white people should be quiet. When we're talking about sexism, men should be quiet. And when we're talking about Scottish independence, English people should be quiet.
Okay. Well, on that note, I'm going to move on. We'll have more debate on this. Talking about Wales and Ireland. We're going to be in Wales next week, in fact, in Bangor. And then there's a special programme on the 27th of March. It's at 8:30 on BBC One, and it's from Birmingham. It's called Britain After Brexit, the kind of thing we've been talking about here, but I hope we'll have teams of 3 either side on this. What happens once Article 50 is triggered? So there's that programme on the 27th. Then there's a question time from Carlisle on the 30th of March. So I'll announce all that at the end, which will make you fall asleep over your... but they're the details on the screen. That's how to apply. There's the address to go to and the telephone number to go to. Let's go on to a slightly different point. Isabella Spooner, let's have your question, please.
Should Philip Hammond resign?
Nice, straightforward question. Should Philip Hammond resign after a budget that lasted a week? Angela Eagle.
Well, I think he's been put in a pretty humiliating position. We've had this huge, screeching U-turn on one of the main points of what was meant to be a very simple budget. He was meant to be a safe pair of hands, and he's fluffed his budget. And the more astonishing thing about it was how it emerged that he hadn't realised he was breaking a manifesto commitment. Now, I read the Tory manifesto, but apparently he didn't. So
But you didn't leap up and down immediately. It was Laura Kunsberg of the BBC who was first to spot it, according to Hammond.
According to him, that's absolutely true. He was told by a BBC journalist, Laura Kunsberg, that he'd broken his manifesto commitment. He hadn't discussed any of this with colleagues. The Cabinet hadn't noticed. And we're putting these people in charge of Brexit negotiations.
Was the policy right?
Well, the interesting thing about the policy, and the problem with the way he's botched it, we have a huge issue in the future with the idea that people can be made to be apparently self-employed and opt out for a minor tax advantage of their employment rights. Many people are told they have to be self-employed before they're given work, and that means they can't get access to sick pay, to holiday pay, to maternity or paternity pay. And this is affecting our tax base. So he was right, in my view, to look at this whole area. But because he introduced the tax before talking about the benefits and botched the reform, he's been dragged to the House of Commons by his own side and basically announced that even though there's billions of pounds of tax revenue at risk, that he can't do anything about it for the rest of the Parliament. Well, I think his credibility is going south.
Right, Tim.
I'm not sure about that. I know in business that we frequently get things wrong, in fact, almost every day. And if you had only had someone like Theresa May around to give us a good telling off, we'd change our mind more quickly. But we always say within Wetherspoon, it's fine to zigzag to a good conclusion. So there's nothing wrong with making a mistake. You just have to own up and then get on with it.
There's a woman shouting at you. Hold on. Wait till I get a microphone to you, and then we'd like to hear what you're shouting.
So it's OK to make a mistake, even if you're the Chancellor. Surely this is an example of incompetence.
No. No, chancellors make mistakes all the time. The amazing thing about democracy is that it works, and that we have all these debates, in Parliament. Angela gets on the case, so does Jacob, and that's why it's such a great system. And the problem with the European system is that there are 5 unelected presidents, and you can't deselect President Juncker. So great to have our democracy when we can point out Philip Hammond's mistakes.
I think it's completely,
and he's lost trust in the
completely unacceptable that Philip Hammond should have been humiliated in this way. It's completely unacceptable.
Well,
and he
by
must
the Prime
have,
Minister, you mean?
By the Prime Minister, and he must have considered resignation in the last couple of days. And she must also take ownership for what was in the budget statement. She saw it. Presumably the Cabinet discussed it. How it has been allowed to arise, the impression that it was all Philip Hammond and nobody else, seems to me wrong. And I think any Prime Minister who humiliates her Chancellor in the way that this has happened will find that revenge may well be served, as Geoffrey Howe served revenge on Margaret Thatcher, cold in the future.
Come on, Matthew, he's a grown-up guy. He can take a little bit of a cuff around the cheeks from the Prime Minister.
He'll have taken the view that for the Chancellor to resign at the moment, at this critical moment when we're about to trigger Article 50, would be against the national interest. But he will be hurting, he will be smarting.
I'm surprised he'd be that sensitive.
And he will have his revenge. Politicians are sensitive.
Are they?
Yes, yes.
All right, well, Jacob Rees-Mogg, it was Conservatives, allegedly, who insisted that this measure was dropped.
Well,
and you presumably were one of them.
I said so in the budget debate that followed the Chancellor's budget. I didn't think it was a good policy. I think that you need to look at the whole issue of national insurance and disguised self-employment in a proper way and have a fundamental reform of national insurance, which is not a contributory insurance, is basically an income tax, and look at it properly in a detailed way.
But what about the point that Matthew made?
I'm about to come to Mr. Parris's point. I do not think, as the lady asked, that Mr. Hammond should resign, and I don't think he's been humiliated.
No.
I actually think that there is an enormous wisdom in being able to admit that you have made a mistake and have changed your mind. All of us in our daily lives make mistakes, and we all know that it is better to correct that mistake and reverse quickly rather than waiting and having to reverse anyway. And the lady who asks about the Chancellor, shouldn't the Chancellor always get it right? Well, somebody said of Elizabeth I, a man called Wentworth, he said, "None is without fault, no, not our gracious Queen." For his pains, he got sent to the Tower of London. But actually, his point was right. We all make mistakes, whether we are the Prime Minister or the Chancellor. I'll exclude Her Majesty from this, but we all make mistakes, and we are best off if we reverse them as swiftly as possible, and that is serious-minded government.
Can you not just hear... Can you not just hear the pleasure oozing from Jacob Rees-Mogg as he patronises Philip Hammond and says that we all make mistakes? The fact is, the Leavers don't like Philip Hammond. They don't think he's a sufficiently hard lever, and they are enjoying the humiliation of the Chancellor.
I'm so sorry. This is a wrong obsession with Europe that I used to be accused of when I was a Eurosceptic before we had the vote, and now the Remainers have become. This had nothing whatever to do with Brexit or anything like that. It seemed to me a bad tax move and one that was not right to introduce.
Why wasn't it spotted then? If it was in your, if the climb down was because you'd made a commitment that he didn't want to break, why did nobody, the Prime Minister, the Cabinet, you?
I think the error was that they thought that the bill that had made it impossible to change national insurance covered the manifesto commitments. I think they looked at a more recent document rather than the original document. And that's a perfectly...
The 1922 committee were told that there would be no reversal of this when they were complaining about it last week. There were Conservative ministers on the TV defending it as it was reversed. There are a lot of people that won't forget this huge mess.
No, but that's deeply unrealistic. And I hope that when the time comes that I'm in opposition, I'm not so unrealistic. Everybody knows that a policy reversal cannot be half admitted. You can't say, well, we might reverse it to tomorrow or we might not. You have to wait until the point the reversal is announced.
Joanna Cherry, then I'll come to you. Yes, the woman there, I'll come to you in a moment. Joanna.
Well, of course we all make mistakes, but this was a colossal mistake. It was the centrepiece of his budget. And now that he's had to do this screeching U-turn on it, there's a £2 billion hole in his budget. Now, this has got to be worrying. He didn't mention Brexit at all in his budget, which most of us found quite surprising and concerning. But this is the man who's going to be in charge of the United Kingdom's finances as we go through the Brexit process. And he made a colossal mistake in his budget. He seemed to have completely forgotten about a manifesto promise. And what happened here was that the Tories rebelled almost immediately. Now, I'm sat between two Tories tonight, and they'll know better than I do that Tory rebellions normally tend to be a bit slow burn. But this one started immediately. You could tell from the faces sitting behind the Chancellor as he announced this that people weren't happy about it in the Tory party. And of course they wouldn't be, because this change would have had a major impact on small businessmen and women. I'm sure there's many of you sitting in the audience tonight who would have been impacted by this. And at the very least, if you're going to make such a huge change in policy, you should carry out some consultation with business beforehand. Clearly, this was some smart aleck idea that was thought up to balance the books in ignorance of a manifesto commitment that's had to be reversed immediately. And yes, in normal times, to answer Isabel's question, in normal times, one would think that this was a resignation matter. But unfortunately, we're not living in normal times.
I don't think the public agree with that. I think the public think this was OK, a medium-sized mistake. He changed his mind, so what? But it's about the ego of, according to Matthew, really, and the sensitivity of politicians. We don't go for this. You made a mistake. The next day you corrected it. That's fine.
Fine. OK. And we've got... I'm sorry. We've only got 5 or 6 minutes left, and I do want to take one more question. I'm sorry to you. I know I did say I'd bring you in, but I can't do everything. Hannon Wilson. Hannon Wilson, please.
Are we asking the impossible from the NHS to deliver with the money it has?
Are we asking the impossible from the NHS to deliver with the money it has? Angela Eagle.
Well, yes.
We have to be quite swift, I'm afraid.
Yes,
on this,
I think so. There's going to be a real terms cut in the next 2-3 years in NHS budgets. NHS staff who keep the whole thing going haven't had a pay rise of any amount for years. The huge cuts to social care, which have happened since 2010, nearly £5 billion worth of cuts to social care, have actually put enormous extra pressure on the NHS. The other week, I did a shift with the paramedics in my local area, and they are constantly on the go. As soon as they deliver patients into A&E and clean the ambulance and get ready to go again and say they're available, they are called. It's massive, increasing pressure, and we have to realise that we've got to fund our NHS properly, but we've also got to ensure that we fund social care properly and ensure those areas work together more. Otherwise, we will lose our NHS in the next few years.
Right. Tim Martin.
I'm worried that the NHS is a sacred cow. If you've got a car firm or an agricultural economy, people compare it with other countries and other firms in the world. We've got to start saying, how does it work in France? How does it work in Germany? How does it work in Australia? I think they've got better systems than us.
And the NHS,
they do. But we can't go on like this. It doesn't work anymore, and no one wants to say that.
The woman up there on the back there.
Hello. It's the most efficient health in the world.
Exactly.
It's not
cheapest.
A car firm. It keeps us all going. It's vitally important to this country. It's not the same as another industry. It's being treated the same as another industry. It's being underfunded and personally... And sold off, exactly. And we need to protect it. And we know what's happening to it.
Jacob Rees-Mogg, is it impossible to deliver?
The money for the NHS goes up year in, year out. It was ring-fenced in the age of austerity. It's getting another £10 billion before the end of the Parliament. I don't think endlessly providing more money is ultimately going to be the answer. There are enormous strains. The ageing population, 1 million more people over the age of 75 since 2010. In 7 years.
So why
it's
are
an
we
extraordinary...
social care?
Well, social care is also getting more money, but the Labour Party always thinks it's about money.
No.
But it's not. It's going to be about delivery, and I think we're going to have to think very seriously about how we deliver health and social care in this country, and we've got to be open to reform. I don't know what that is. I don't have a policy prescription, but I think we need a national conversation about how we're going to develop this, because there isn't endless money. There isn't a money tree that is going to pour billions in. It has been protected in a time of austerity, but there are always demands for more. An ageing population, better types of medicine, on it goes. And I think we need a serious conversation about how we're going to develop
And
this.
would you like to see or examine the possibility of a tax specifically for the NHS?
No, absolutely not. Hypothecated taxes are a great mistake because they lead to the wrong amount of money, either too much or too little. The too much then gets pinched, and the too little has to be topped up. Governments cheat on hypothecated taxes.
You there, ma'am.
I'd like to ask what the government's going to do to provide more GPs. I work in a GP surgery, and over the last 3 years we've struggled to even get locums to come in because of the amount of paperwork that the government put in place. So there's actually less time for patient care, and then the government say, oh, we need doctors for 24 hours a day, make them work longer. They work hard.
So you mean
is
it money or the administration that's in the way? Both. Matthew Parris. Matthew Parris.
Yes, we are asking the impossible from the NHS, and we've always asked the impossible from the NHS. The NHS has always struggled, always wanted more money. Politicians have never been able to give it as much money as they want, and the result is that we have a good second-rate health service in Britain for the cost of what would in any other country be a fourth-rate health service. We get very good value out of the NHS, but it's under strain and it's fraying, and we must find new sources of revenue. And just to cut to the quick, I think people like me ought to have to pay something towards our healthcare because I can afford to.
Joanna.
Yes, the Tories are asking the impossible of the NHS in England and Wales because they underfund it. Health has devolved in Scotland. The Scottish Government has pumped record funding into the NHS in Scotland. We have the best A&E waiting times in the United Kingdom. We have more staff per head than the NHS in England and Wales, and you see no junior doctors striking in our NHS.
What are the outcomes?
The Tory Government should take a leaf out of the Scottish Government's book and fund the NHS in England and Wales properly.
What are the outcomes?
What's your point, Matthew?
What are the outcomes in health in Scotland?
Health in Scotland is improving, Matthew. Health in Scotland is improving. For example, ladies and gentlemen, prescriptions in Scotland are free, so vulnerable, disabled and elderly people get their prescriptions for free.
OK, you, sir, on that. You've had your hand up all evening, yes. Brief point, we've got to end.
That's fine. I think that the NHS is one of the most fundamentally important things about the UK. I think it's far more important than Brexit. I think it's far more important than anything. And I think that people should have more say into what the NHS delivers and how it is run. I think it's far more important. I think most people here would probably agree. Everyone here has and is going to use it. Way more important. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much indeed. We have to stop there because our time's up. Apologies to the many hands in the air, if you can apologise to a hand. Our time's up. We're going to be in Bangor next week. And on Monday, the 27th of March, we've got this special 1.5-hour programme on Britain after Brexit, which is coming from Birmingham, 8:30 on BBC One. And it's about, well, we don't know whether Article 50 will have been triggered on that Monday or maybe the day after. But anyway, that's the context of it. And then a normal... There's no such thing as a standard question time, a normal or a regular question time in Carlisle on the 30th of March. So if you can come to any of those programmes, you'll be very, very welcome. That's Bangor on the 23rd, Birmingham on the 27th, Carlisle on the 30th. You can apply on the website, which is on the screen there, or call 0330 123 9988. As you full well know, if you are listening on Radio 5 Live, this debate will go on until 1 in the morning on Question Time Extra Time. Here, my thanks to our panel, to all of you who came to take part. From Bognor Regis, until next Thursday, good night.